will call the Plan Commission meeting to order.
Why I bring it up is where we need our cow path.
Excuse us.
Everybody have a chance to take a look at the minutes?
Yes. Move to approve.
Second.
Got a motion second to approve. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Public hearing regarding conditional use permit for Summit Ridge subdivision related to City of Hudson Municipal Code Section 255-18 and Wisconsin Administrative Code NR 118.07 Sub 1 Land Division. Is there anyone here who would like to comment on this? Yes, step forward, and I don't know that anybody here knows who you are, so if you would please give us your name and address.
Yeah, I've been here before. Doug Rowan, 295 Riverview Drive. I'm representing myself, my family, and our homeowners association. We would recommend that you do not approve the conditional use permit. It would dramatically change the nature of the neighborhood in the Riverway district, and so that would be kind of our perspective. Also, it does not seem that they've included the requirements on vegetative management under NR 118 under either the conditional use permit or the other, let's call it the Road to Nowhere plan that has been proposed. So we don't think the developers are doing an appropriate job of managing the NR 118 guidelines, and we would recommend that you don't approve the conditional use permit. Any questions?
Why do you not think that they're meeting the NR requirements? Just in 2 sentences or less, if you can.
Well, I can. So the plans that have been presented to the city and have been shared with the public do not meet the vegetative management guidelines of NR 118.
Heard that. Okay.
And I'm not sure there's a way that the lots can work to make that happen, either under the conditional use permit or the standard, let's call it plan, that the developers have proposed.
Thank you.
So I don't see any way that either of those work. And the standard plan also has some easement issues connected with it. So those are additional issues.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yes, sir.
Anyone else?
I'm Tom Nielsen, and I'm the president of the Villas of River Ridge Association, which adjoins Mayor Road on the south end. A couple of things that at the last Planning Commission meeting, when you postponed for review, I guess would be the way to say it, on the last request, there were 3 parcels that were being discussed. Now, in the new PIDs that are recorded with the county, it's down to 2 parcels. One 20.2 acres and one 18 acres. And I see on the, I've heard nothing about any changes of plan or how to get the egress out of this better, because there's such a tough way to get that many homes out of facility when they're not going to go on to Carmichael Road. They're going to go on to Aspen Drive, which is a short drive. They're going on to Industrial Road, which is also a tough drive, and nothing said even about O'Keefe Road on there, which I would say would be as good a out as any. But then I see that on your November 12th plan or public meeting, there's a review in that to talk about changing the 5 acres that was mentioned before, which now isn't mentioned in this, is changing that to business commercial. And that was one of the key arguments that we had originally, but that's not being discussed tonight, but it is on your November 12th agenda for the Common Council, not for planning and zoning. But we are definitely, we're not against something being done there. We're just against what they're proposing to do. And I realize a lot of it's about the money. When you're getting that kind of money for a piece of land, you need the density needs to be heavy, if it can be. But we just feel traffic-wise and appearance-wise, as your conditional use permit states on the city's rules, that the Common Council has the right to approve, but that it basically needs to meet the credibility of the city, if you will, or of the area, and we just don't feel that this extreme density that they're looking at here meets it at all. So we would definitely be wanting to go on record that we are against the concept as it is, and see no reason that that suddenly this should be made into a conditional use permit when I see that stays with the land. It doesn't stay with the developer. A conditional use permit stays with the land if they were not to develop it. But it really needs to be looked through and talked about and argued about before it's finally done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Brooke, 1901 Twilight Lane. I've attended a number of these sessions and first really want to thank you for having these types of open discussions to hear what people's concerns are. I've lived in Hudson about 22 years, and I've seen us with all the regrets after the dog track and all the should-haves and how that's all played out, and now we're moving forward. I would urge that with all the concerns that have been raised repeatedly, and very legitimate concerns, that we let the dust settle on how we move forward with that whole development of the dog track. Why the rush? That land will be there. Let's see how things go with this dense population and how we do, because it will be very, very difficult to backpedal if we move forward at this point. Thank you again for the opportunity for these discussions. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other comments? Any other comments?
I'm Patty Nault, 1412 Wheatgrass. I'm the president of the Tallgrass Homeowners Association. A lot of our homes back up against Mayor Road and run along Aspen Road. The traffic now is pretty busy, just with people cutting through from Carmichael, going over towards, when they had the entrance to 94 open, they use the Mayor Road exit, and they come down and they go up, what's that side road? By your house, Tom? Huh? River Ridge. Mm-hmm. And it's nonstop from about 4 till about 6:30. People walk their dogs, walk their children, jog, do all sorts of things there. And I can't see, 30 or 40 homes dumping out onto that if each home has at least 2 to 3 vehicles. The speeds aren't watched on that road. People go tearing down there on all sorts of night time, and with more vehicles coming out there, I don't think anybody will be safe or feel safe to walk their kids, their dogs, and have their families walk along that road. So I agree with the woman that was just up. Step back and take a look at what we really have.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Jeff Mazinski, 1417 Wheatgrass. I guess I'm getting kind of lost. Are we talking about A or are we talking about C on what we're talking about right now? Is this the Wisconsin administration? Or are we talking about the development of what's going on with the first zoning area?
A is the public hearing and C is the...
Are you talking about agenda items?
Correct.
A is the public hearing and C is the discussion and possible action on the item.
So right now, are we talking about both of them? Or are we just talking about the Wisconsin Administration Code
We're holding the public hearing
For the land division.
for both, for everything that's happening?
No, just for Summit Ridge.
On the Wisconsin administrative or the condition permit of the ridge related to the municipal code? I guess if we're looking at the agenda and that, I mean, the development, the way that everything is written out, I'm not really sure where on this agenda that we're supposed to sit down and talk about each particular part, or if we're supposed to talk about it as a whole.
Jeff, I think C and D is where we'll have the conversations.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's basically because, again, with the Wisconsin administration, they're supposed to be 1 acre lots, and now he's trying to bring it down to, I think, 1/3 lot, 1 acre lots. And, you know, last time we had this and that, he was thinking about 3/4 acre lots, but there was no watershed, you know, areas and everything else. So now that we have to look at everything as, you know, the Wisconsin, you know, right to do things, he still has a map with a road going to nowhere. So I really do ask, you know, we've had 2 meetings in June, 2 meetings in July, 2 in August. We need more information on really how he's going to develop this, what he's going to do to it, and what he plans on it. If you look at, again, you know, he's got a road going to nowhere that he even put in, you know, these plans on, you know, for the first 17, which we brought up last time. And now he, you know, brought it down to 1/3 lots, and he put in holding ponds in the back, and there's just too many questions. And then if you look at the housing, I tried to get what the housing plans look like for this development. They don't have any housing plans. All it is just a picture of what the fronts would look like, but not the houses. If you got a 1/3 of an acre lot, really, can you have a $400,000 house or a $500,000 house in such a small area? Hudson is not that tight of an area for land. So would somebody be willing to pay $400,000, $500,000 for such a small lot that he's, you know, projecting on this stuff? And you're going to have to say, I'm not a developer and I'm not a realtor. Is this even feasible to have what he wanted was high-end housing on those lots? And I don't think that it is. So, you know, when we get closer down to the other agendas, yeah, I've got you know, other viewpoints that I'd like to make about this. And last but not least, it's kind of like, how many times do we have to pay tax dollars to listen to this, to come up with one more little proposal? But in a nutshell, there's not enough information. And he's been doing this since June, July, and August, spending a lot of our time, city money and everything else, having you guys listen to us and come up with a half-baked idea in my eyes. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Any other comments? Any other comments? Any other comments?
I move we close. Whoops, I'm sorry.
I want to make sure that, for the record, that we include the correspondence from Kay Lutsky, the Shoreline Policy Coordinator for the Wisconsin DNR. The letter came to us this afternoon about 1:30. It's at your places. I can read it. I'll do that for the audience. It says, "Dear Mr. Johnson, I am writing with comments for the proposed planned clustered development CUP." I'll include this for each of the public hearing items. I won't just, because it kind of touches on the whole thing. I think it's important just for the record, but I'll read it just this once. I am writing with comments for the proposed planned cluster development CUP application submitted by Land Devco of Hudson LLC. Please submit this letter for the public hearing October 23rd, 2018. The Summit Ridge subdivision is located in the Rural Residential Management Zone in the Lower St. Croix Riverway District. A planned cluster development means a pattern of development that places residences into compact groupings as a means of preserving open space. It should be noted that there needs to be space on each lot for one single-family residence and 2 private on-site wastewater treatment systems if not located on city sewer and water. A recommendation would be that the open space be legally recorded with a description for areas to remain as open space as well as the allowed uses within the open space. NR 118.05 sub 1 depicts uses allowed within the rural residential management zone. Any further development would also have to comply with the rural residential management zone. If you have any questions or need clarification, please feel free to contact me. Sincerely, Kate Lutsky. Also, for the record, a letter from Cheryl Lindholm at 291 Riverview Drive, Hudson, Wisconsin. Thank you for the notice of public hearings regarding the land Demcoper development plans of the Lee property recently annexed. However, I would like to express my concern for the lack of detailed plans being presented at this hearing. In the 1980s, my late husband Richard and I purchased a riverfront home which borders the western edge of the property in question. During this time, we have been compliant with the federal scenic waterway regulations. We have been involved in volunteer projects through the Metropolitan Council working on maintaining the purity of the river water and preserving its natural scenic value in the Hudson area. One concern of mine is the issue of the old stand of old growth trees on the western and southern edge of the property. It would be my hope that these mature trees could be saved from being taken down and remain as natural visual feature and audible buffer as they have been for years. Unfortunately, I will not be in town for the hearing on the 23rd to express my concerns. I am also concerned about the lack of details involving the easement of a private driveway which lies in this annexed area and how that is being addressed by the developers. Thank you for what you are doing to preserve the quality of living in the Hudson area by refusing to increase density to occur. It is necessary to preserve as much of our natural environment as possible for the generation that follows us. Sincerely, Cheryl Lindholm. You drink water now.
And then I move to close the hearing, the public hearing.
I'll second it.
Got a motion second to close public hearing. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. The public hearing is closed. Next, public hearing regarding conditional use permit for Summit Ridge subdivision related to City of Hudson Municipal Code Section 255-18 and Wisconsin Administrative Code NR 118.07 sub 2 planned cluster developments. Is there anyone that would like to comment on this? Any comment? Any comment? Any comment?
With this, this is Jeff Mazinski, 1417 Wheatgrass. With regarding the second one, again, these plans are incomplete. I'm asking and wondering if the streets are big enough for emergency vehicles, where they are expecting to have the runoff of the water going to. In none of these maps, it will show where the water is going to. You can look and you can assume, but everybody knows what this assumption of assume means. So basically, is the cul-de-sac big enough to take a fire truck and turn it around? Is it big enough for an ambulance to come in and get out with a patient or anything else that's needed for this? If you also look at it, there's some other drawings that I have seen, and they also are filling in the ditch, which would be on Meyer Road, which does the overflow from the north side of Meyer Road goes into the field. So with that being said, where is the water supposed to go from the north side of Meyer Road, and how is it going to be dissipated somewhere else? I guess tonight's agenda for me is there's not enough plans for this. There's not enough stuff in here. They really are not looking at everything like they're supposed to. And it's, again, it's wasting our time. So basically, you're going to have to answer those couple of questions for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff.
Doug Rowan, 295 Riverview Drive, again representing myself and my family and our homeowners association. There does not seem to be enough definition of what's going to be built on this property or how it's going to be constructed to make any kind of conclusion at this point in time. So I would reinforce Jeff's position, and also don't know how all the requirements of NR 118 will be applied to this development because it's not in any of the plans that have been publicly distributed. So, thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Any other comments? Any other comments? Any other comments?
I move we close. Public hearing again.
Got a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Public hearing is closed. Discussion and possible recommendation regarding conditional use permit for Summit Ridge subdivision related to City of Hudson Municipal Code Section 255-18 and Wisconsin Administrative Code NR 118.07 Sub 1 Land Division.
Mr. Mayor, I'd recommend that the applicant make their statement, and staff will go through our report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nick Vivian, counsel for Land Devco of Hudson. I think it's really important to understand what we're asking for tonight. I know there's some confusion about the agenda and confusion about what the Plan Commission is actually considering. We're not here talking about the preliminary plat tonight. That comes at a later date. What we're talking about is use. And really for this parcel, what we're talking about is use under NR 118, state's administrative code, which applies to this property, and the city's ordinances. We've come to the city with two requests with respect to this particular property related to use, because the administrative code and the city's code require us to do so. First of all, as Mr. Schofield stated at a previous meeting, in order to subdivide this land, in order to divide it into any lots, any parcels whatsoever, we have to get the approval of the city to do so. I presume it's not the city's intention that this land remain as one parcel. And so the comments about the look and the feel of the development as it relates to a conditional use permit for the subdivision are wholly misplaced and really irrelevant. What we're talking about here is whether we can subdivide the land, period. And I suspect that there's really not an objection to being able to subdivide this particular piece of land that we're looking at, which falls inside the section line under NR 118. With respect to clustering, NR 118 specifically provides and specifically allows for clustered developments within NR 118 land. And so we are permitted to come to the city to ask for a cluster proposal, which is why we're here for that purpose. We are here for the purpose of proposing 25 single-family homes. Members of the audience are asking what's being built. Single-family homes are being built. We've provided pictures of the product that's intended to be built on those parcels. A month ago or so, we came to the Plan Commission with a plan and a concept of what this might look like, and the Plan Commission had a number of comments. We took those comments to heart. We incorporated those comments into our proposed plat, which we've included for a visual depiction so that you can see what the development might look like with 25 acres. And the result of incorporation of those comments resulted in lots being smaller than we had talked about previously. The road takes up more space than it did previously. the outlot areas take up more space than we had previously. And so that put additional pressure on those lots. So from the perspective of a development which is well planned, which creates green space, which creates an environment which really works for this area, but also addresses all of the comments that the city, that the Plan Commission had offered previously, this is where we end. And we think it's pretty good. But from the perspective of platting, the preliminary plat itself is not before you. That will be before you in November, the actual layout of this development. What we're asking you to consider is, number one, can we split this land? And number two, can we have 25 lots as opposed to 17 lots? Now, state law, despite the fact that others would say you shouldn't do it because we don't like it or because we don't think it's right, that's not Wisconsin law. Wisconsin law with respect to conditional use permits says specifically that if a use is conditionally permitted, and if we make application, and if we agree to comply with your requirements, then we are entitled, as a matter of right, not as a matter of opinion, but as a matter of right, to have that conditional use permit granted. And so we're not asking for a variance. It's a different concept. We're not asking for anything that we're not entitled to. We're simply asking for what the law allows us and what the law would grant us if, in fact, we comply with your ordinance and with the requirements that you've imposed. Now, I've reviewed the staff memo, and the staff memo seems to indicate that we're in compliance with all of your requirements. We've heard from Mr. Johnson with respect to the DNR's review and with respect to the deed restriction on the fact that the property can't be further subdivided. We agree. We have no issues whatsoever with respect to those requirements. And so we simply ask from a use perspective that the Plan Commission consider the standards, consider the requirements, and consider actually what we're here for, and that is approval of a particular use, and consider granting or at least recommending approval to the council the requests that we've put forward. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions?
If we deny the conditional use permit, would that then force this back to 17 lots, not 25?
Well, if you deny the conditional use permit from the developer's perspective, this particular development probably doesn't happen. Now, you're correct. If you deny our request on the 25, we're left with 17 because all we can develop are 17 1-acre lots. But the reality is we've shown you a picture of what 17 looks like. And they talk about this road to nowhere. Obviously, the other development would have to change. But there are certain economic realities with respect to the development of this site. And let me also say that we're talking about 42 acres here. You've done other developments in the city of Hudson that are much larger and much more expansive. We're talking about 42 acres, and we're talking about 25 lots here. So in the grand scheme of all of the development within the city, this particular development is pretty minor with respect to some of the larger developments that have been done in recent history.
Thank you.
So Nick, are you, I realize you're asking for conditional use permits, or use. The big question is, though, is this the river road over here and the egress easements you have with that? And I'm trying to understand what plan going forward would be for you guys to remedy that situation.
You're talking about the easement off the end of the cul-de-sac?
No, the south end of it.
South property line.
South property line, yeah.
And of course, you do have to deal with the easement, and it looks like you have
You brought it back.
Oh, sure.
on the west.
Yeah, so the concept there, so two things. So really, this plan changed significantly when we were asked to put a cul-de-sac in as opposed to a through street back up to Mayor. And so that resulted in that cul-de-sac. But what it also allowed us to do is it allowed us to kind of change up the configuration of the lots to the west and on the end. So that easement now sits in an outlot that's going to be owned by the association. So Whereas in previous plans, you saw that easement crossing lots, the easement is no longer in any buildable lot. And let me say that the easement itself has been the subject of lots of comment. It's been the subject of lots of discussion. We've said any number of times that we don't intend to disturb the easement, that we don't intend to restrict any access. By law, we're not permitted to do that. By law, we're not permitted to extinguish the easements. The river owners, the lots on the river, this is their access. We know that. We understand that. And in all honesty, we've tried to work with them on solutions. We've even told them that as part of our site prep, that it may well make sense for us to regrade out and to relocate their easement so it works better for them. We've not had a substantive response. And so what you have after meeting with the city, what you have is a proposal from the developers to say, that's fine. They're not under any obligation to respond to us. And what we will do is that we've got outlot all the way around the outside of the development. That easement will remain in the outlot, it will remain in its current state, and it will remain unrestricted. So there are no restrictions on that easement as part of our plan.
Yeah. And let's talk right into the green space and the holding and the water ponds and stormwater runoff ponds. You looks like you have, if you go to this diagram, you've got two large ones in the southwest corner and then one in the middle of the Summit Division. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what kind of green space are you anticipating with this? Both combined, I guess, Nick, I'm asking.
Yeah.
Is there going to be in between these two divisions green space where you have that trail connecting?
Correct. And we've actually got our engineer here, Sean Bohan. So let me have Sean come up and speak to the green space that will result from the development.
So Nick, what I'm asking you to clarify, and hopefully he can, is what are you doing with the stormwater runoff? What are you addressing to accommodate all of the green space questions and keeping it nice, and of course, berms and trees and et cetera. I've read this stuff, so, but for everybody else, it needs to be explained where you're putting the berms and the trees and protecting those larger ones on the west end of the property.
Sure.
Good evening. My name is Sean Bohan, site engineer for the project. As far as the outlots, we have one large outlot that's within the single family in the area that we're discussing. It's about 9.5 acres. We're going to end up having 2 stormwater facilities within that. And the outlot ends up basically going around the perimeter of the subdivision. You have it along the south, along the east, and we also have it along the west area. And we are looking at preserving those existing trees. The areas that we're probably be taking some down are obviously for the building pads and for some of the yards. But in the area that has been discussed or been brought up about trying to keep some of the old growth trees, we have a buffer of anywhere from 80 to 100 feet from that western property line to the back sides of these lots. So those areas are going to remain basically undisturbed. And then there'll be some areas, possibly within the lots that will also end up having some of the existing trees remain. We are looking at, along Mare Road, there's about a 50-foot buffer from the actual right-of-way to where the lots end up being. And we are looking at putting a berm and also vegetation along through that, kind of keep the area private. Mare Road, I know there was a comment that came up earlier about, what's happening with the runoff. That's overflow from the north down to the south. We do end up having a storm pipe that's going to be, right now it discharges into this site. We're going to continue that and run it through our stormwater facilities. So we're not going to end up blocking any of the water that's coming from the north. We're going to take it into our site and actually infiltrate it within our site and contain everything within our site. So there's the 2 stormwater facilities basically in the southwest. There is another stormwater facility that's basically central part along Mare Road. It kind of ends up abutting lots 25 through 17 if you guys have the concept plat in front of you.
So are the 2 larger stormwater ponds, is that your expectation to drain South Point subdivisions runoff into those ponds?
Yes.
Because you don't have anything else.
Well, we'll end up having a portion of both the subdivisions that go to it. So all of the Summit will end up going to it, and then there's maybe about half or maybe close to 2/3 from the townhome subdivision that'll end up going to it. There is stormwater facilities that will be proposed with that one, and as shown in like the concept plat, there was some areas set aside for that.
Along Carmichael
That's correct.
or County Road F.
I also want to address the green space question as well with respect to the townhomes. I know we're not there on the agenda, but there is a requirement under the PRD that with every lot we provide 400 feet of open area. And so we're working with Mike currently to identify what that open area is and whether that becomes part of some of these other lots, whether it exchanges for some of these lots. But that's a requirement of your code, and we would expect that to be a condition of approval for that particular CUP, to say that obviously we've got to comply with the code and we've got to provide what amounts to be about 3/4 of an acre of open green space for public use.
I want to address a question that was brought up last, and I think your engineer may be able to answer it better, about in front of the townhomes existing on Twilight, or yours, ma'am, I can't remember your name, sorry, Patty. That rain that we had a couple weeks ago, that ditch was full. Mayor Road is going to be able to, if you redo it, are you going to be able to take that out so that water doesn't pond there?
Yeah,
Would you be able to?
Mayor Road will end up basically being reconstructed with curb and gutter and storm sewer.
So it would not go into that gutter on the north side of Mayor Road, rainwater?
I guess I'd have to end up maybe looking at exactly at a map.
It's hard to say.
I can answer that question.
You're taking that water from the north on. Isn't that what you said?
Yeah, from basically there's a 24-inch storm pipe that ends up coming across Mayor Road that ends up being probably 2/3 of the way down the road. That's going to continue to end up, we're not blocking that flow at all. That's going to continue to end up going through this site, through our stormwater facilities and being taken care of.
I don't know. David maybe be able to answer it.
Yeah, so the tall grass development there was allowed for reasons I don't totally understand to construct their stormwater management system partially in Mayor Road right away. So we can't fill that in because that's part of their stormwater management system. So that ponding area, which overlaps into Mayor Road, will remain. The south edge of it obviously will be impacted a little bit by the proposed curb and gutter along Mayor, but that ditch will remain on the north side of Mayor.
So it will reduce the water or increase it?
The Mayor Road water won't go into it any longer. It'll go into the storm sewer system, which will go into the proposed ponds.
Their water would be coming from where?
The tall grass water will go into that pond and then will come through a culvert into the proposed subdivision. Mayor Road's water will get collected by storm sewers and come into the subdivision system. The subdivision itself will be totally internally drained.
So in an ideal concept, none of this construction work that would be done on Mayor Road would affect any more water that would go in their ditch.
Correct. It'll actually reduce the amount of water that goes into that ditch.
Okay.
Because right now Mayor Road drains in that direction, a portion of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Anything, Mike? David?
Go through, I'm trying to think. I mean, obviously, we're talking specific to the land division question right now. It's good to get a good global look at it, though. I think it helps.
Can you decipher the DNR's jibber jabber on this one for the general public and myself as well?
Yeah, what Kay and the DNR are requesting is that if the land division and cluster conditional use permits were approved, that all of the property that's identified as Outlot 1, so basically the halo around the whole property, there would have to be some sort of restriction, deed restriction, some condition placed on it so that it could never be subdivided further. So somebody couldn't come in and say, hey, I want to build a house on the northeast portion of Outlot 1, or, you know, do something wonky like that. Because the idea, the basic intent, or the idea of the cluster is, if you boil it all down, is they want to preserve scenic views, right? Green space and scenic views of to and from the river. That's what their request is there.
So this letter, they're not saying no to this development, but they're clearly pointing out facts which we have to remain within.
Correct.
Fair to say?
Yep.
Okay. So there's no objection from the DNR?
No, I don't read it as an objection.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so you have a staff report in your packets. I'm going to go to page number 4, decision criteria. So in order to be eligible for a conditional use permit for land division, there are 4 criteria that have to be met. The first is the lots proposed to be built on will be the minimum lot size NR 11806 1A and C, and they shall be suitable for residential development. The lots that they're proposed here all meet your R1 zoning. The conditional use permit for cluster development, which is the next agenda item, will allow up to the 25 units. So they meet in my opinion, they meet the criteria, number 1. The second one is that all lots are suitable for their proposed use and will not be subject to potential flooding, inadequate drainage, severe erosion, inadequate water supply, or inadequate sewerage capacity. This development is proposed to be connected to city water and sewer, so we don't have an issue with water supply and inadequate sewage disposal. The proposal itself is on areas that are not within steep slopes. They are not within the slope preservation zones. So the concerns about erosion, inadequate drainage, obviously we're not adjacent to the river, so flooding is not an issue. So the proposed lots are suitable for their proposed use with respect to those items. Number 3, the lots will not be limited by unfavorable soil or rock formations, unfavorable topography, or any other feature which is likely to harm the health, safety, or welfare of future residents of the lots or of the local community. I'm not aware of any unfavorable soil, rock, or topography formations out there. Obviously, the concern that you would have where this would not be triggered is if you're building on a 30% slope, or you're concerned that you disturb this slope and it's going to be sliding down a steep slope. So in my opinion, there aren't any of those conditions that would be harmful on this property. Number 4 is the local zoning authority shall consult the State Historical Society concerning potential impacts historical or archaeological sites. That has been done. We haven't heard back yet. If we do hear back, obviously that'll be incorporated into protections that might happen during construction. But at this time, we don't have any knowledge or concern about archaeological sites on the property.
To whom was that sent, may I ask?
Wisconsin Historical Society. I don't recall the name of the person.
Here locally or
No,
Madison?
it's down in Madison.
Okay.
So, in my opinion, they meet all the requirements for a land division as is being proposed here.
At any point, and going on to the next couple of points you make on 1, 2, 3 of the next, the planned cluster development, none of it will affect the bluff line or the riverside.
Correct. We are
Either plan is 17 or 25 units.
Correct. We are well outside of the slope preservation zones. We are well outside of the setbacks to ordinary high water.
which would be Outlot 1, right?
Yeah, and I think even the furthest point west on Outlot 1, I believe, is, it's certainly outside of the ordinary watermark setback. It's probably close to the slope preservation zone setback, but it's well outside of the closest lot is Lot 4, and it's got a pretty substantial setback to the river.
But they're up on the top of the bluff too, correct?
Top of the bluff and actually kind of falling down the other side.
So is the city saying that they meet all the requirements?
Yeah, so there's actually two, and I can certainly go into the second one if
Yeah, go ahead.
okay. So there's two conditional use permits. There's the land division and there's the clustering. Now, you would think that the clustering would kind of imply a land division, but just for the sake of being consistent, I've suggested that you issue both conditional use permits. The second conditional use permit is related to the clustering. So NR 118 requires 1 acre lots for a rural residential management zone. It, however, allows with a conditional use permit clustering, which allows a 50% increase in the density on the property. The applicant has provided a concept plat showing that they could fit 17 lots on this property. They could serve them with the roadway, and they could fit 17 lots on here. In my opinion, I believe that layout is sufficient to show that what you could do on that property. Yes, you'd have to do some changes on the property to the east. You'd have to extend a roadway to the east and hook up with South Point Drive. You'd have to probably provide some stormwater management on that property to the east. But they can fit 17 lots on this property in the 1 acre, 200-foot condition. So the 17 lots is our baseline. The 150% of that is 25.5 lots. Obviously, a half a lot doesn't do anyone any good, so they've rounded down to 25. With the planned cluster development, there are, let's see here, 5 conditions that have to be met in order for you to issue this conditional use permit. The first is that the proposed clustering provides a better means of preserving scenic views, open space, and shoreline than a traditional single-family residential subdivision. As I mentioned, they provided a 17-lot layout that had 0 common open space. So I think it's a reasonable interpretation to say that the proposed cluster provides more or preserves more common open space than you could have under a traditional single-family residential neighborhood. The property does not abut the St. Croix River, therefore the shoreline, there is no shoreline to preserve in this case. I will note that preservation of scenic views is subjective. I'm sure there are people that may not agree that this is better than a cornfield. I would argue that it's a little tough to determine the preservation of scenic views. I will submit that that's a little bit nebulous of a term. So, the second condition.
Why don't we? I thought you were going to go through this. Why don't we go back to the land division question and work through that? Unless you want to keep hearing it. Does this help inform you on the actual land division piece?
I think it confuses us a little bit myself.
Okay.
To be honest with you.
Okay.
You can stop.
Let's work through the first question on the agenda. Sorry, I didn't. That's right. So, we've walked through those decision criteria for the basic land division. Are there questions on that?
I want if he's willing to, Mr. Nielsen, answer a question. Tom, would you do that? On the point question, is your association opposed to this Summit Ridge condition? With the proposed changes?
The interesting thing is we haven't seen the proposed change.
You haven't seen?
No.
None of you have seen that?
Yeah, we haven't seen that.
Okay.
But
Is it on the website?
If we're only talking single family, I, as a representative of our area, And if it's properly laid out, which I'm hearing it is, I wouldn't say we would ever be totally objective to single-family housing. And contrary to what was said earlier, being a realtor as I am, yes, people will pay a lot more money than is expected for a lot that size. So I'm not concerned about, but what we're concerned about is all the additional stuff that's going to be. If it's strictly single-family, none of us are dumb enough to think that sooner or later it isn't going to happen, as long as it happens the right way. And when you talk about Mayor Road like you have, my understanding is the developer is going to have to build a new Mayor Road.
Correct.
A Mayor Road will not exist as it is today.
Correct.
Nor with the same problems it has today. Those will all,
Excuse me?
nor with the same problems. It'll all be fixed.
Yeah.
Correct.
But as single-family housing, again, not just that I'm a realtor, but single-family housing would be inevitable in there sometime. I'd welcome seeing the whole thing as single-family as long as it was, there wouldn't be a lot of lots. Again, it's not going to be comfortably amenable financially for the developer. And I still say that's the whole thing behind this whole thing is value-based for the Lee family. But single-family residents, we all are smart enough to know that sooner or later that could happen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Again, Doug Rowan. You've heard me before, so. The concern I would have is, I don't think there's any concern with subdividing the property. The 17 lot proposal violates our easement. And so if the city engineer really thinks that 17 lots can be fit on that property without a conditional use permit, I would like to see that plan, because that plan has not been presented without violating easements that are currently in place. So if the calculation on how many lots can go on the, let's call it the conditional use permit, is based on the 17 lots, and some percentage of that, that's not at all clear in the documentation we've received. Because the 17 lot...
25 lots now.
It's 25 lots, not 17.
Well, but the 25 lots is based on the 17 baseline, okay? And if the baseline is wrong, then the 25 lots is also wrong.
Okay, I get it.
Okay?
Yep.
We have no concerns over subdividing the property. I mean, that's the right of the owners and or developers. But the logic that's being used to do the calculations is completely false. So,
David, could you answer that mathematical equation for us?
Yeah, lots 16 and 17 that are shown on the concept plat that the developer showed as as their baseline. Lots 16 and 17 are buildable lots, even with the easement on them. I understand that Mr. Owen wouldn't like for his easement to be across two residential parcels, but you could build on lots 16 and 17.
On the old ones over here.
and what's being done with the existing structure on lot 16? And the reconstruction of that, because NR 118 has rules on that too.
On the is it a
Existing
corn crib?
structure.
What exactly is it's? I'm understanding it's a corn crib.
Have you been to the property?
Yes.
So you've seen the structure then?
It's not a. We're not talking about a substantial structure.
Well, it's a structure.
Sure, but it's not. It's
and
not
it has to
something
be
that-
rebuilt within the current foundation or the current.
No,
Well, that's what NR 118 says.
they're not proposing to reconstruct that structure.
They're gonna keep-
You're mixing up.
So they're going to keep that structure. Is that the proposal?
I
haven't seen that proposal. So
I haven't seen that proposal either. I think their intention.
so
is to
so either they're going to reconstruct it or they're going to keep it.
No.
So what it-
Or you can take it down.
118 does not. NR 118 does not prohibit removal of structures that have reached the end of their useful life. There's nothing in NR 118 that would require that.
I wish that was true for my house.
If you want to improve or expand a building, obviously there's provisions in NR 118, but that's not what they're proposing to do with
Well, I don't know what they're
accessory
proposing. That's the point, is we don't know what they're proposing to do.
Well,
That's the whole point.
I would say it's irrelevant to the discussion that we have here today.
Okay.
Well, no, I want to comment on that. If I gave out, a set of plans and they haven't seen any of this, I understand your comments. You aren't looking at what we're looking at, or we've been looking at. So for you to be able to comprehend and interpret this.
It's really hard.
Yeah. How about impossible?
It's like, up in the ether somewhere.
Yeah, no, you can't.
Well, it's on the website, is it not?
We went through most of these objections with them last time, which resulted in what we have before us today.
Okay.
For example, the easement on the south property did go across people's backyards. And we objected to the fact that that could present a problem in the future of some homeowner deciding he wanted to do something, leave his stuff there, a conflict with it. So the developer created an outlot there, then that easement is no longer owned by an individual, but is now there by the
Yeah, so
subdivision.
I'm looking at page 18, which is one of the proposals from the developer.
No.
I think it's 18. 18 of 64, which is the 17 lot layout.
That nobody has in front of them anymore. That's history.
It's on the back side here.
It's on the back side of one of them. Flip this.
It's not history, it's part of the current,
There we go.
There it
Yeah.
is.
it's part of the current
Here's
record.
the two lots that they're talking about.
Yep, 17 and 16, yep.
That is not what they're asking.
And there's
That's not
an,
what they're asking.
But that's not, yeah.
They're asking for the flip side.
no, I understand they want the conditional use permit, but they don't need the conditional use permit to subdivide the property. They've already proposed another alternative, which also is not compatible with existing constraints,
No.
let's say. But they don't need a conditional use permit to subdivide the property.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, they do. For NR 118.
Really? Even in the 17 lot version, they need a conditional use permit?
Yes. It's my interpretation.
For the
that
land
they-
division, yes.
Yeah, for the land division, they need a conditional use permit.
Okay. Well, that's my misunderstanding then. So I apologize for that.
We're all trying to figure it out, that's all.
Yeah, I know. We are too.
Yeah.
And without having seen it, you would have no knowing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just for clarification, these are on the website, these plans. I don't know, did you know that, Pat?
No.
Yeah. So it's accessible to the general public on the website.
Yeah, I've seen the stuff that's in the agenda. Everything that's in the agenda I've been able to see. So,
Well, then.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I just want to reiterate 2 points. To that point exactly, I printed the entire agenda off at 5 o'clock tonight in preparation for this meeting. And everything that's being discussed here at the table is consistent with what you have in your packet. You have larger versions on your desk, so you can take a look at larger scales. But the information is available, and so to stand up and argue that they've never seen or not had the opportunity to see what the Plan Commission is looking at is relatively disingenuous at this point. The other thing that I want to bring up is this concept of the easement. It's so far-fetched to say that you're using the wrong baseline. Mr. Rowan doesn't own the land. He owns the right to an easement for access, for ingress and egress, and whatever other uses attached to that easement. The underlying land is owned by the Lee family. So the fact that Mr. Rowan and his folks have an easement that burdens the Lees property, that's a right that they have that the Lees nor any successor can take away from them. That being said, it's still part of the land that the Lees actually own, and so it's fair to count that land as part of the baseline. And the only reason it's important is because you have to decide how many lots are actually available, and that calculation as determined by your engineer is 25, and that's what we're asking for. Again, notably, Mr. Nielsen has told you that he doesn't have an objection to the lot split nor to the single-family use, and your staff has told you that we meet the requirements of both the law and the ordinances. And so from that perspective, it would appear that there's little latitude at this point. I understand you have to have your discussion and consideration. You're certainly welcome to consider the various conditions of approval, but certainly we meet the requirements of the statute and the ordinance moving forward, which is why we've made this proposal.
All right, any other questions?
Everything you've said and everything is on there, that's correct. The lot size, it does meet everything. I guess the biggest thing is that I have to ask you guys to look at is, it will meet everything, but now the question is, what are you going to put on those lots, and is it going to be adequate to the development of the whole lot itself? We started off in June saying that these were going to be $400,000, $500,000 homes on there. Basically, with these 17 lots, obviously we're down to 1/3 acre. The way that the housing is in Hudson, you've got pretty good sized lands and lots. And basically, can we still put our, I guess I'm asking you guys, you might have to ask some realtors, can you sell a $500,000 on these lots that are going to be 25 now? Because basically it's going to be, yeah, you're going to have 20 feet between them, but will somebody pay that much money for a house? Or are we going to be developing now $200,000 to $300,000 houses on these lots because they're only 1/3 acre? The attorney said at the beginning that, you know, this is a court of law, this is the way that things are supposed to be done. This isn't a court. There's no judge or anything here. And then he said that you're entitled to it. Nobody's entitled to anything. I'm not entitled to anything. He's not entitled to anything. You have to ask for things. Entitlement means that you're given something. We are not given anything. We have to fight for everything that we want. So when he starts spouting off attorney stuff like that, it just really bothers me that when we come into a city and we start doing this stuff, it's, again, I'm just asking, can we build the same amount of housing that's a $500,000 house or a $400,000 house and sell it in that area? So
I just want to comment on that, you know, we're not here to decide what risk the builder is willing to take. So the builder is taking a risk that he'll build a place on that and get the price that you're asking for with reduced lot size and all that. And if the builder's willing to do that and willing to take that risk, who are we to say you can't do that?
Okay, so I'm asking the question then, are we just looking at lots, or are we looking at what can be developed on them?
Purpose again, right?
We're just looking at lot division right now.
Right now, we're looking at,
Lots.
can he divide the lots?
Yep.
And
The answer
I
is
guess
yes.
my answer would be yes, but the
Yes.
question would be, he can do that, but is it good for the city to do that because of the fact, and you can go back to 2009 when we were going to develop this land at one time. But now it's up to you guys to decide, okay, we're going to bring this down to a 25 lot. Whatever they build, it's really going to look upon you guys. And I think you guys should be looking at more or less not just thinking, is this going to be all legal, and is this, what's the city going to look like? What are they going to build there? And what kind of, single family homes are going to be put there? You also, like I say, with the ponds and everything else, we're looking at green space, but what can you do with a pond? What kind of green space? You can't, put different things in there. So besides just looking at it as, yes, you meet the criterias of everything in there, what is going to be established into these things that's going to make the city look prosperous? Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. All right. Anything different, new?
I don't know. I'll wait until you decide. I'm Dan Brook, 1901 Twilight. I'm a neighbor of these folks sitting here, Village of River Ridge. I'm here really to speak on behalf of the generation of Mr. York's kids and grandkids, if I could. I appreciate what the lawyer said. In the broad scheme of things, it's fairly small, fairly insignificant. I disagree with what my good friend Tom Nielsen said. I am dumb enough to think that it doesn't have to be housing there. I agree with those who suggest that there's maybe an overriding arch. In research, we call it a theoretical construct that is to be placed on top of all of this, and that is what's best for the community. Not necessarily what makes money. Certain things may be legal and right, but they may not be wise for the sake of the common good of the community. And so I'm thinking about how dumb I was about 55 years ago when I was teaching at a wonderful little college here in Wisconsin, Carthage in Kenosha, and teaching a course in marriage and the family. I made the mistake of ordering a small little book, really, to go be as a corollary to the main book that I was using, and it was called Sex is Never an Emergency. Now, I'd ask you to think of what that kind of a topic does to post-pubescent children who have a lot of hormones running. It was a disaster. Sex is never an emergency means nothing to college kids. However, I notice that most of you are beyond that hormonal stage at least. And my advice is just to say that development is never an emergency. This is not something that has to be accomplished right now. We are moving into generations who are much more interested in quality of life and open space, green space, space that is open for everybody to use. Housing is not necessarily a plus. There is I think, a limit to growth in a place like Hudson. I've mentioned it before. In my judgment, it's about 15,000. Everything is in place. There's enough of a tax base. It can have wonderful qualities of life without all these concerns if we just sort of limit the space and start thinking of that. So on behalf of Mr. York's wonderful two kids and maybe hopefully some grandchildren in the future, think about them as you make this decision. And I just encourage you not to think always that development of more property for housing or anything else just because it's legal is necessarily wise. In this case, I really recommend you not do it because I do not think it's wise for the future of Hudson. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anything else from the committee? Do we have a motion?
We on C still?
Yeah.
What are we on C?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, still C.
I do want to make one comment based on some of the last couple comments that were made. And it has to do with codes and structures, and I'm not trying to take sides here or anything like that by any means. Us as a body, number one, most of us are volunteer. We do this because we are concerned about Hudson. We want it to be nice. There's some old names and some new names here, and so we share your concern. Number two, rules are written that apply to everybody. Unfortunately, everybody's concept of what they would like to see and what's nice or good for a community might not quite match what's code. We are, however, bound by rules that are in place to treat everybody fairly, and that if the code conditions are met, we have a hard time saying no. And you're seeing, if you watched it here on downtown development, you know, on some of the new buildings that are going in downtown, the height, some issues like that. I mean, very contentious subjects, but they are meeting the city code, the riverway, all the riverway coding, all of that. And so how do you say no? Well, we don't like it. We don't want to obstruct the view for the guy behind them. We don't have the right to say that. So unfortunately, some of the, you know, the comments made, my heart hears those loud and clear. However, rules are rules, and the rules are meant to be fair to everybody. And so sometimes our actions are based on that, just so you understand that. Not that we didn't hear everything that was said tonight. So, wanted to say that, felt pretty strong. What do we need here? What?
I guess I'll make a motion that we approve.
I'll second it.
Got a motion and second to approve. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Discussion and possible action, discussion and possible recommendation regarding conditional use permit for Summit Ridge subdivision related to City of Hudson Municipal Code Section 255-18 and Wisconsin Administrative Code NR 118.07 Sub 2 planned cluster developments.
Now, we can go through the next.
So this is the second part of the decision criteria memo that starts on page 5 of the staff report. They've asked for a conditional use permit to allow for cluster development. There are 5 criteria for a cluster development that have to be met in order to be eligible. The first is that the proposed clustering provides a better means of preserving scenic views, open space, and shoreline than a traditional single-family residential subdivision. We've discussed to some depth the baseline of 17 single-family residential lots that are at least 1 acre and at least 200 feet wide. That layout provided no common open space on the property. The proposed 25-unit subdivision does provide, it's not 9.4 acres because some of that is taken up by stormwater ponding areas, but it provides a significant amount of green space on the property. There is no direct abutment to the St. Croix River, so the preservation of shoreland is not applicable here. I mentioned that the preservation of scenic views is a subjective measure. I'm sure there are people that can disagree on, reasonable people can disagree on whether this preserves scenic views. The second condition, or the second criteria, is that proposed structures comply with the minimum ordinary high watermark setback and bluffline setback and height standards. The proposed lots will all comply with the ordinary high watermark setback and bluffline setbacks. We have a condition, if we get that far with regard to the staff recommendation, that all of the structures on the property will have to meet the height standards that are included in NR 118. The third condition is exception to standards may be allowed for planned cluster development provided the total number of lots may not exceed 50% more than the total number of single-family allowed if it complied with all of the requirements of NR 116.06. I mentioned before that, in my opinion, 17 lots is buildable on that property without the clustering. They're providing they're proposing 25 lots, so therefore it meets that 150% criteria. On any lots that abut the river, there are additional standards. That does not apply here because there's none of them that are directly in abutment to the river. If the lands are divided, the land division meets the requirements of NR 118-07-1, and we just recommended approval of that conditional use. So, in my opinion, we meet all 5 of the criteria for a planned cluster development. I will highlight again that the preservation of scenic views is a subjective measure. I'm sure there are people that may not agree with that particular item. That's why we're here, and that's why we have a public hearing that's been gavelled open, or was gavelled open. So, provided that you concur with the staff recommendation, we recommended 7 conditions, and I have one slight change to one of the conditions. It's on page 6 of the staff recommendation. If you folks concur with the criteria that were laid out prior to, the following conditions should be placed upon it. The applicant must obtain final plat approval from Plan Commission and City Council. The applicant must obtain all necessary DNR approvals, including but not limited to notice of intent permit. No proposed lots or outlots shall be subdivided further. That directly addresses the comment that Ms. Lutz, the DNR staff person, mentioned. So none of these lots can be subdivided in the future. So lot 17 can't be split into 2 lots.
Does that apply to the outlots?
It applies to the outlots as well. So the outlots can't go in. You can't have someone buy the west corner behind lots 2 and 3 and put another house in there.
That's why I asked.
You can't slide a house in between lot 16 and the east line of the, so that subdivision further. No more than 1 single-family residence shall be constructed on each proposed lot. There are provisions in your code that allow, like, mother-in-law suites, garden suites, garage suites, that sort of thing. They require conditional use. We can't have more than 1 single-family dwelling on each of these parcels. So those conditional uses should be denied if anyone were to come in for those approvals, because they would, instead of having...
So for clarity on that, if somebody wants a detached garage, that's a no.
They can have a detached garage. They can't have a residential unit on top.
Can have a dwelling unit.
A dwelling unit.
Cannot have a dwelling.
Yep.
Thank you.
All structures constructed on the proposed lot shall be in compliance with 215.18 or 255.18, which is your code, and then NR 118.061D, which is the maximum structure height. Again, we're talking about the division at this point. You don't have before you final blueprints for each individual lot, but they do have to comply with, so there's kind of a durable requirement that has to go with the land, that they can't go and put a 60-foot cupola on one of these lots and overlook the river from a substantial height. One thing that I do need to add to condition number 5 is NR 118.062C deals with structure colors in the rural residential riverway. Structures all need to be earth toned. So we can't have, as much as anyone might like, a bright pink, for instance, on again, just on this portion of the property. So that's a requirement of NR 118. I think it should be a condition here so that it's clear that they have to be earth toned. They do have to comply with all city ordinances. We have a number of conditions here. We obviously are not repeating every condition that's in your code for every potential section. And these conditions have to run with the land, not with the developer. So once each property is sold, that next owner is subject to that. That's directly related to the no subdividing of the lots, building of the structures of the right height, of the right color, that sort of thing.
Questions?
Can I just ask, Mr. Mayor, off-topic question? A lot of, as we review these different ideas and developments, we've talked about the overall vision of what we want Hudson to look like and so forth. Can you just refresh my memory on when we update the comprehensive plan again?
Next year.
Next year, in 19.
In 19,
Yep,
okay.
we'll start that process this winter, most likely.
I mean, just because this has come up so often, you know, when we've looked at these potential plans and so forth about what do we want the overall view and vision of Hudson to look like, and how do we allow the green space and the parks and all of those different pieces. So 2019. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Questions, comments?
So you need a motion with staff recommendations. I'll make that motion.
And I will second it.
We have a motion, a second. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Public hearing regarding conditional use permit for South Point subdivision related to City of Hudson Municipal Code, Section 255-15, planned residential development. Anybody here have any comment? It's a public hearing. Anybody like to make any comment? Would anybody like to make a comment?
I'll make a comment. My name is Rob Howard. I'm representing Camp St. Croix. I'm the board chair at Camp. As you know, Riverview Drive is a major access point for the north property access to the day camp for Camp St. Croix. And that corridor is, I guess, it's a very vital piece of the separation from the kind of the urban life and the, you know, to have that chance to feel the softness of the trees and the natural environment as you enter that north property. So right now there's a delightful corridor with tall tree-lined avenue on each side of the road. And one side, on the north side, is part of this property. So, and our intention is to be a good neighbor. But our primary intention is the safety and security of the children and the families that come to the north property for the day camp. So I'm not asking a great deal, I think, but from what I can see in the plans, there are twin homes that are backing up immediately adjacent to that Riverview Drive. I'd like to see and challenge the developer if it might be possible to allow a little more of a green buffer, maintain at least some of the existing tall trees that are there. I know that there's quite a buffer that occurs between the edge of the property and County F that doesn't really get depicted on your plats, but if you can kind of see it from the GIS, you know, the county site, you can see that as County F sweeps to the curve around the dog track, that there's a little more buffer space there, which is great. You know, and I'm not sure that, I mean, that's all city or county property, I think is what it is, I suppose, but it's not part of the development. But I'd encourage the developer to kind of include that in the depiction of the property because it's really such a vital asset. It's just a little bit more kind of extension of the survey line or whatever, or the documentation. But I would like to see a little more kind of a little more easement in green space along Riverview Drive as it's adjacent to the camp property, if that's possible. So that's my only comment.
May I make a comment here? I was under the understanding from earlier explanations that green area was about 100 feet. Did you hear that too earlier when we were talking about the the outlots or the easement area that they were planning?
Yeah, I noticed there's a wide easement on the.
That's the area you're talking about?
Well, there's a wide easement that's depicted on the parcel you were just talking about. The Summit Ridge parcel has quite a
but it goes right through.
Not as these align with each other. That easement is not continuous as it appears to me. Okay. I may be mistaken, but it doesn't.
That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, that's what I'm. Yeah. I would like to see it continue, but it doesn't appear to.
I think they are.
Fred.
Doesn't go all the way.
Yeah, it doesn't,
See, these lots are right up.
so it appears that those twin homes are essentially going to denude the landscape and be abutted right up to Riverview Drive.
They straightened me out. So
Yeah,
thank you.
just something to be, I mean,
This one didn't do it.
I know we can't
There is no setback.
we can't influence the developer on what they need to do. I mean, they do what they do, and I understand that. As an architect, I know how that works, but it would be very helpful, and I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Go Irish. I couldn't resist, I'm sorry. Anybody else? Any other comments? Any other comments? Any other comments?
I move we close the hearing. Public
Second.
hearing.
Got a motion and a second to close public hearing. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Public hearing is closed. Discussion and possible recommendation regarding conditional use permit for South Point subdivision related to City of Hudson Municipal Code Section 255-15 planned residential development.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd ask that the applicant also provide a statement in regards to this proposal.
And could you also please address Mr. Howard's question and concern, if you'd be so kind? I mean, we want to know what that space is,
buffer, yeah.
if it's tapered down or whatever it is.
Yeah, we can absolutely speak to that. So the concept on this request, again, we're not dealing at this point with the preliminary plat. We've already worked through the issues with respect to the density that we can have on this site. You'll see the preliminary plat at your next meeting. Here what we're talking about is establishing a planned residential development by conditional use permit. And why do we need that? We need it for two purposes in particular. Number one, there are going to be townhomes in this development, and we need some deviation from the setbacks. And Sean can speak to that as to what we're asking for. And then secondarily, with respect to your minimum lot size for development, we have interior townhomes that don't have side yards. And so your minimum lot size is 4,500 square feet. But when you have interior townhomes that don't have the benefit of counting area in the side yard, that becomes fairly unwieldy to put a townhome on 4,500 square feet. So we're asking a deviation for a smaller minimum developable lot size within this particular development.
And what is that?
It's 3,600 square feet.
From 4,500 to 3,600 is what you're asking?
Just for the interiors, when you look at the plans. For those
interiors is?
Yeah, we've got the specific lots called out.
Good example. You have this one.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at that. I just want to know which ones, what numbers.
Say 45 through 48, 51 through 54, 35, 36.
Okay, I get the.
So the row housing.
I see how
yeah.
they,
Yep.
yeah, okay, I get it.
So it's important to note that the city, throughout the city, there are a number of planned residential developments, and you see this often. Again, it kind of comes back to that clustering concept. So when you have additional density, and when really the dictates or the aspirations for good planning require, the city does provide those that are developing property with the opportunity to come in and ask for some deviations, and that's all well within the context of the code. Again, I'd look to the requirements of your code for the criteria by which you make determinations based on your planned residential developments. The site has to be 10 or more acres. The site shall have a minimum amount of proposed public or commonly owned open space. The boundaries include lands as shown on the city's official zoning map, and the permitted uses include single-family dwellings, two-family dwellings, townhomes, or apartments, and certainly we're proposing townhomes. Now, with respect to the open space, we understand that based on a PRD 3, that we are required to provide 400 square feet of open space per unit. And as I referenced earlier, that requires that we provide approximately 3/4 of an acre as open space, and we're in the process of working with Mike and his staff to determine whether that takes up effectively a lot or two, or we have a different concept of potentially utilizing 4/4 acre pieces or components within the development. So we'd simply ask that if you see fit to approve or recommend approval of this request, that you make it a requirement that we comply with the code in providing the open space, and we'll work through that in conjunction with city staff as we make that final proposal to the council as to how that open space is identified. But we see the prospect, rather than providing a 3/4 acre parcel, which may or may not be used as a park, as one option, but certainly we see 4/4 acre areas connected to sidewalks with benches and small sort of pocket parks as a very attractive option as well, particularly as we look at a development that's very usable, very walkable, and very accessible to the residents here. So I'll ask Sean to speak to specific deviations with respect to the setbacks, so that the Plan Commission has a better idea of what we're asking specifically with respect to the lots.
So lots, the lots that we're looking at are probably lots 21 through 31 of the twin homes that abut the property coming into the camp. We are looking at putting an outlot along there to address, basically to address what we end up talking about with the other subdivision earlier, where we wanted an outlot, we wanted the association owned, we don't want to have 10 or 15 landowners to have this part of an easement and stuff that gives access to the camp. So there is an outlot that's going to be running out to Carmichael or to the county highway, 16.5 feet in width. Some of that has existing pavement already. Some of it ends up having the trees. And then there is a 30-foot setback that we're looking at having to where the twin homes would be. Again, we'd look at clearing, at least for the building pads, and what we would end up needing for any type of, say, porches, patios, that type of stuff. And try to end up leaving some buffer, but until we end up, kind of getting into the full grading plans, I don't know exactly what that'll end up being. But there will be some trees that are going to be left along through that area.
We're talking the south border now?
We are.
And so what's your expectation of the width of that at this point? You said 80 to 100 feet back on the western point.
No, so if we're talking, the other stuff, the single family, that has an outlot that goes about 100 feet. Yeah. On this one, we end up actually having a road. We have a 30-foot setback from the building to where the outlot is.
It's different, I understand.
Yep.
So what is the buffer then in there, noting what you said?
It's going to differ a little bit on each of the lots, depending on, within that outlot is already the existing road. There's a portion of it, anywhere from like say 8 to 10 feet, that ends up being the existing road. And then there'll be another anywhere from 6 to 8 feet that'll remain undisturbed. And then we'll have a portion of the backyards that'll be undisturbed. But we are going to have enough room to be able to end up putting the building pads in there, the patios or the decks. So
I get it. How do you figure 4 1/4 acre pieces of land will replace 1 3/4 or 1 full acre for outlot for recreation and all that? I'm curious about that because maybe the community wants more than just a park bench or something like that.
Yeah, that's a neighborhood amenity. It'll be the.
We're still working with staff and stuff on that, but we did end up showing some areas that, you could end up having maybe a tot lot, and then you could end up going to another area, might end up having benches, that type of stuff. That would be an amenity. You end up having sidewalks throughout the subdivision, so you'd end up having access, to these like, basically 1/4 acre open
Corner
spaces.
association things.
Yep.
If I'm looking at the population there, that, you know, if you could have quite a few people in there. And if they have kids, they're gonna be looking for a place to play and do all of that, and I guess, excuse me, I don't, you know, 4 quarter-acre little sections and or 1 3/4 might not be enough. I guess is how I'm looking at it. I mean, just thinking when I was a kid, I mean, you put me in a little cage like that, I mean, no thanks.
Are we going to need a cow pass under F to go from the west side of F, this neighborhood, or the part that they're recommending later for commercial, from there to the dog track property, and from the dog track property have one that goes under double F or Cooley to get to the school, just to keep the kids off of the streets?
Is that a relief to that property, so then the kids from that subdivision go play over there because there's no place to play there? I mean, that's the question I'm trying to ask right now is, does that give them a safety valve to say, okay, go play over there and not here? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but it'd be no different.
But on a safety issue, I agree with you.
But it's no different than telling what was Hans Hagen that, you know, Hans didn't put in any parks in Red Cedar Canyon.
Yeah.
They have their trails that are the neighborhood amenities, and they put in some amenities that are controlled and owned by their homeowners association. But they paid an impact fee to the city on each lot.
In lieu of?
In lieu of the city saying, the city said to them in those neighborhoods that those are a neighborhood amenity that helps the marketing and sale of that neighborhood. The city wanted the dollars, and in the case we use it there, to do White Camp. And said we can create a much larger impact, a safer area, and a more controlled environment on a larger scale than a bunch of little postage stamp spaces all around. That is going to be a problem.
Well, I want to hear what he has to say, but
Yeah,
that's why.
and so let me add 2 things. Number one, with respect to trails, there is a trail that will run down Mayor and then south down County F. And so there's going to be a trail that we're installing. Secondarily, we're not necessarily set on the concept of 4 quarter-acre parks, but we think it might be a better and more desirable option than having a single parcel, which is 3/4 of an acre, which is a park that may or may not be suitable for serving the children or for serving whomever. Now, what this all boils down to, though, is the ordinance that the City of Hudson has. And the ordinance, the standards that you've set as a governing body, that the council has set as a governing body, says that for PRD3, we are required to provide 400 feet of area for every unit. So that's the standard, and so we're just trying to work by your standard, and we're not asking for a deviation from that 400.
Right.
We're going to provide exactly what your code requires, in conjunction with your staff, who, you know, hopefully will be able to come to a common understanding as to how that best lays out. So we're not comparing ourselves to other developments. We're not asking for a deviation to 300 feet. We're simply proposing that we're going to comply with the ordinance and the standards as the city has identified them.
Okay.
Am I hearing that it would be preferable to be one contiguous piece or the 4?
I'm talking function.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, tiny little areas are, you know, they're not functional for what? You can't have a tennis court on it, you can't have a baseball field on it, you can't have a volleyball net on it, what can you do on a tiny little chunk of land? And where you get a bigger piece, you can do lots, I mean, you have more possibilities. I guess that's how I'm perceiving it, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're not.
Yeah, and why with the others, we've always gone for the impact fee in lieu of, to avoid that, and with those kinds of small features are really neighborhood amenities to help in the marketing of the community. But we are creating a bigger issue, not just germane to you, but caused by Look at all, if we have that density of people coming in, and the families we're creating there, and the kids, we've got a school just kitty corner from there. They're talking about wanting to have the number of apartments at the dog track site. How are we going to get kids?
Cross those.
I mean, they're going to be worse than the deer getting picked off out there. I think we need to, as part of our planning and looking at that, is how do we deal with the pedestrian traffic that we're going to be creating out there, and that's only going to get busier as that goes out there.
I agree.
You can't have a crosswalk across F or Carmichael there. So how do we get people around out there is going to be an issue for us to face.
Agreed. And I think a good point to bring up too is that county bike ped plan that they had approved last year.
Mm-hmm.
So as we went through the annexation process, the development of the capital cost study, and all of those items, we identified that, that trail, that 10 to 12 foot trail along the west side of Carmichael there, going west and then connecting back up with industrial, that would go. Does that solve our issues further south? No. Is the bike ped group working and had conversations with the Y Camp? Yes. We do have the one tunnel further south, obviously. Is that going to get us there long term? No. But it's a start.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's how I approach it is, if we can get and require them to have that 10 to 12 foot trail to start making some of those connections. We're going to be redoing industrial after Vine next year. Vine. So to continue that up, and then we'll eventually run to the Hagen Street Bridge, and what are we going to do there too? So I think that point's well taken, Pat. I think
Pat, though, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are TIF district probably funds available to address some of those issues
within a half-mile transportation improvements. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
All we're saying is anticipate it because it's coming.
And get the easements in from one neighborhood to the other, or from one subdivision to another, so that the foot traffic can then go that way and do it, because that's going to get busy.
And I don't think we want to make the mistake that was made further north on Carmichael in terms of pedestrian movement, lack thereof.
But especially with the magnets that the school and the Y and those things are going to be.
Absolutely.
For activity.
Absolutely.
Playing on the playgrounds at school instead of the subdivision. I mean, all kinds of things could happen if they had a way to get there safely.
Played at the high school. Worked out perfect.
Yep. Anyway.
So you need a motion?
Yes.
With staff recommendations. I'll make the motion.
I will second.
Got a motion and a second. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved.
Which one are we on now?
Now we're going to the G.
Discussion and possible action on certified
Commercial.
survey map and comprehensive plan amendment from park to single and two-family residential at 1225 First Street, submitted by XL Energy on behalf of Mary Teresa Albert.
So XL has submitted a certified survey map to sell a small portion of their property at 5 St. Croix Street over to 1225 First Street. When the home on 1225 First Street, Mary Albert's home, was originally built, it was actually built 2 feet into XL's what is currently their property. So like a portion of her home isn't actually on her property. And currently her goal is to sell her house and property, but she can't until it's fully within her boundaries, essentially. So her parcel's currently zoned R1 as well as the northern half of Excel's property, so there's no rezoning amendment that needs to be done. However, the comprehensive plan shows the area to be reserved for park space, and so amendment will need to be made to the comprehensive plan.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion?
I do have a couple things to add to.
Okay.
Interrupt us.
There were the conditions that were on there on the sheets currently. They're not totally up to date yet. I did speak with the surveyor from Excel about this, and he has since sent an updated CSM to us yesterday. Yeah. Yep. So he's fixed that issue. However, now we've found a couple other things that need to be amended to it. And
Well, then I change my approval or recommendation to include addendums.
Yeah. So the addendums would be correcting the spelling of map. Currently they have it spelled as MAO instead of MAP in one part of it, and then to omit language about it being a resolution.
I apologize for not hearing you through.
No, it's okay.
I apologize.
That's it.
All right. Everybody good?
Amended motion.
Yeah, do you want to amend that to?
Yeah. Yes. In a second. Yeah, we did it.
All right. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Discussion and possible action on a recommendation on a zoning map amendment from B2 General Business to RM1 Multiple Family Residential and a comprehensive plan amendment from General Commercial to Medium Density Residential at St. Croix County Tax Parcel 236-2041-00-000, Citizen State Bank.
I'm a mess here. The applicant is here to make a statement on this request as well. I got it.
All set?
Yep.
So, on this one, the property that we're dealing with here is this B2 property, which is shown from a zoning perspective. And on your comp plan, it's identified as general commercial. So, Citizen State Bank is the owner of this parcel and has been the owner of the parcel for some time. They've tried to market it for private sale and development as general commercial, and unfortunately, given its proximity to the adjacent single family, there's really been no interest, and the banks just held it, and the bank certainly has an interest in conveying that parcel out. And so what the bank is seeking a recommendation from tonight is a change to residential, medium density residential, and a change in your comp plan, and a change in zoning to RM1. So we're looking for a medium density use, we're looking for a residential use, and effectively what you see is you look at your land use planning maps and your zoning maps. So you have single family to the north, you have single family really all north of Handley here. This is the Highway 35, Interstate 35 running north and south. And with respect to that single family, it's all clustered. So it's all part of planned residential development. So you have that higher density look and feel with some open space in that particular area, but it's all residential. And then to the south of Handley, what you have is all industrial park. And so I think originally when this property was zoned, there was some thought that maybe neighborhood commercial would work, maybe proximity to the residential developments would work, but it just really hasn't. It's out of the way. It's just not suitable, or not well suited, I should say, for commercial. So what the bank is asking for is some density on that property with medium density, and an RM1 zoning classification, which potentially would allow for the development of an apartment building or something of that nature. It really doesn't sit well for single family because it is a smaller parcel. So for infrastructure and for subdivision, it's not well suited. And so as you look at what you have immediately adjacent to and surrounding, that medium density would seem to be the right density classification for the use of the property. And RM1 with the uses in RM1 for developers would at least make it somewhat attractive and provide some flexible options, whether it's higher density in terms of townhomes or whether it is the opportunity to construct an apartment complex with the approval of the Plan Commission and the Council. But at least it'll give us a fighting chance, we think, to market and to put it in front of some developers who might make this parcel work. So ultimately, we're asking for your consideration and your recommendation in the comp plan amendment and in the zoning amendment so that we can move this to a little higher density residential type use for development purposes.
Questions?
I think that was zoned commercial back in the day when they were doing the development across the road. And that whole corner was, remember, if you slated the bank was going to go in there, Royal was going to go in there, a whole bunch of stuff was going to go in at one time across the road, and that all changed.
Yeah.
And you're kind of the last man standing, I guess, of people, you know, they all pulled out years ago, and so you're still there. What does this develop mean? What type of occupancy complex density are you talking on this thing? When you say that RM1, I don't know those are.
But it's medium density, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but it's 6 to 16
Yes.
Units per acre.
Yep.
Okay.
3 stories. I mean, you could.
Does that fit the area?
It's a pretty intense corner already when you think about the development of the service center across the street and the business park. You got a park and ride immediately behind you too, and then Hudson Meadows, which is, while single family, is pretty dense. So I see it from, if you're just looking at it from a very purely planning level way of transitioning uses, it makes sense. Intensity, you're stepping it down as you head north from the business park. You got a 4-lane highway immediately to your west.
Right.
You know, it makes sense. That's generally where you'd see a complex.
6 to 16, what's the step below that? If it's not 6 to 16, what's the next classification?
RM2, you're looking at.
Just curious.
It'd be an R1.
Refresh my memory.
Well, he's looking that up. Just so the commission has an idea, this is a 6.22 acre parcel. So, you know, if it were a step down from RM1 is going to require us to put in single family homes, or a developer to put in single family homes, and to try to develop a 6 acre parcel with single family homes for a developer is, you know, nearly impossible.
I understand, but I still want to hear this just for, so I know.
Certainly.
Put it into context. And does it fit the overall master plan? I mean,
It's hard to say exactly because the property is what, 6.2. Then you have maximum coverage of 70% in an RM1. Your height, you're limited to 35 feet in height.
Okay.
So you couldn't go too terribly high.
3 stories. Yep.
Yep. Your setbacks are pretty substantial in terms of 35 in the rear, 30 in the front. You're talking about.
You'd have to have pretty good parking if you had
I'd have
any
to run the
size.
math exactly and how you.
Okay, well, no, you've painted a little
You're
picture.
not getting a 7-story high rise.
Okay. I move we allow the rezoning of that property per their request for for the reasons we all know.
Okay. Got a motion?
Second.
Motion and second. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Discussion and possible action on a recommendation on a zoning map amendment from AR Agricultural Residential to B2 General Commercial for a 5.54 acre portion of St. Croix County tax parcel 236-2068-00-000, previously 040-1025-70-000, Land Devco of Hudson LLC. I'm back again.
This again relates to the Lee property and the development that we talked about earlier. And the piece, earlier there was conversation about previous discussion about a 5-acre parcel that is no longer in that discussion. Well, now it's back in this discussion. So the 5-acre parcel that we're talking about, this is the parcel that was brought in by annexation. This is the Lee property, the entire property here itself. There's 5 acres on the front part or the easternmost part of this parcel that was brought in. When this property came in, it came in as ag residential, the lowest zoning classification. And so as we moved through the rezoning process, we rezoned the back piece of it RM1 for single-family housing. We rezoned the middle section RM1 for the townhomes. We had asked for a higher density for that front 5 acres, which the Plan Commission wasn't thrilled about. And so we went back to the drawing board to figure out what that should be and what a palatable use of that property might be. So it currently is ag residential. When you look at your future land use map, the future land use was always contemplated in red here as commercial. And so your land use plan, your comprehensive plan, already calls for this property as it comes into the city to be utilized for commercial purposes. We are simply back here now asking the Plan Commission for its recommendation on a rezoning to rezone from ag residential, the lowest zoning classification, to B2, which would allow us to make that commercial use of that property consistent with your land use plan, your comprehensive plan. Now, I'm sure the question is, what are we going to do on that parcel? Well, we're identifying a number of different possibilities. B2 does allow for some mixed use of the commercial property. So some perhaps commercial use and residential use. There are other opportunities for pure commercial use, and we're currently in the process of identifying potential uses with developers that might be interested in developing that 5-acre parcel. What's important here is really what we're looking at is what can we do with that property and how does it fit with your plan?
It also allows for apartments.
It allows for a mixed use of apartments, but there has to be a commercial component on the first floor, and that first floor can't be used for residential. So there are some additional restrictions with respect to apartments. The other piece is that the buildings have to be smaller, and you can't accommodate as many residents. So while there is an opportunity for apartments, and that may well be the direction that we go in the future, it's not a foregone conclusion because the development costs of building 4 buildings as opposed to building 2 buildings is restrictive. And really what we're looking for is, number one, we need a zoning classification because we can't do anything on an ag res zoned piece of property. And then number two, we're trying to figure out what fits with the rest of the development, the homes, the townhomes, and then what's that additional amenity? Is it commercial? Is it a commercial residential mix? You know, what is it? But it also has to fit your plan, and so we're looking at the plan that you actually have in your comprehensive plan, which is why we think a B2 zoning classification, which, by the way, is the underlying zoning classification for the dog track, which will, of course, be subject to a planned commercial development, but it's the same exact classification as you have right across the street.
I'd be just concerned that, and you kind of touched on it, with restrictions to the higher density apartment buildings, which would not allow that. Is that correct?
Go up to 36 units.
So they could potentially jam a lot more.
You can go up to 36 units. 30% of the main floor has to be used for commercial purposes, and no apartments can be on the first floor.
About height.
35, I think.
No, it's higher.
It's higher than that. It's higher than that.
It's a 3-story. It's a
It
it
could
will
be a
allow for
4-story.
a 4-story building because it gives credit to that first story commercial, and then you're allowed to have 3 stories of residential, but you can only have 36 units per building. So
60 feet. You could go up to 60 feet.
when we talk about higher density, well, your code has restrictions on what you can do. But again, I'd come back to the question of if the Plan Commission didn't want high density, and so if it's not going to be high density, we look to act consistently with your comprehensive plan, which is commercial, which at least opens some options for the potential for development. We still have to come back for a number of different approvals depending on the avenue that we take, but we have to have an underlying development classification that makes sense.
But this is this is all right next to the whole residential, right?
Yep. That was that high density area you guys struggled with that one meeting, wasn't it?
Just try to picture what you would put up there.
Well, what might it be? Let me give you an example. So it might be a couple of apartment buildings with office space on the main level, or Mike has suggested in the past that fitness space, club space. There's all sorts of low intensity commercial that you could utilize on that first floor with residential on the other floors that would make it more compatible with your surrounding development. But the other option would be to do a commercial strip, frankly. You have other commercial in that area. Now, that's not our preferred option, and my clients certainly aren't in the business of developing commercial type properties. But so we're principally looking at probably a mixed use commercial residential sort of facility or buildings that meet your requirements, which are frankly lower density than what we were proposing previously.
Or it could be a really big park.
Wasn't there a comment made in a previous meeting about the fact that in order for the rest of the project to go, this had to go as a high density?
Well, we have to be able to do something with this parcel, and the reason being the acquisition costs of the land are significant, but then we're building a new Mayor Road for approximately $1.5 million. So the reality is we're going to sell 25 homes and we're going to sell townhomes, but in order for this project to be profitable on 42 acres, there has to be a viable commercial use for this particular part of the property as well. So it's an important economic component of the overall development.
Yeah, you can't have vacant land. Yeah. Well, I guess, I wasn't at that big discussion, but I understand that, we're not all high and want high density. I think you already know that. And so what can that be used for other than, we suspect the general business classification still allows you to build something pretty high density. And we're afraid of that. I'll be just blunt with you. We don't want that.
But frankly, we could build, if we came in with a proposal for RM1, let's say, for this property, to back up to the rest of the RM1, we could put another 100 units in. And the Plan Commission at 16 units per acre. So Plan Commission didn't like high density, where we were requesting to go higher than that. I think we were requesting 150 or 180 units in the apartment complex. But the reality is consistency with the surrounding area, with what's been approved by the council, probably allows us, if you want us to continue with residential, probably allows us another 100+ units. And that, I don't think that makes sense from a ground perspective. I think it makes more sense to limit the buildings, reasonable density based on your code, keep it consistent with what your land use plan has called for, then allow it to develop. And frankly, I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about what the market dictates. We're not sure what the market's going to dictate for this particular parcel. We have to find, you know, if it is commercial and if we're looking at a mixed-use development, we have to find a developer who likes mixed-use developments, you know, or if we're looking at a commercial building or something that's going to complement what's going to happen at St. Croix Meadows, we've got to find a developer who's going to find this site to be attractive.
You like a quick trip?
I don't know. I don't know. I wouldn't think you'd want a gas station in that close of proximity to townhomes and that density. But I mean,
aren't there restrictions about how close?
That'd be a conditional use.
Right.
In a B2.
And I don't know if 5 acres would be large enough for a quick trip. Frankly, I'm not sure what their size requirements are. But again, it comes back to this concept that when you bring property in, it comes in at the lowest level, and it's currently ag res. And we could put under ag res, we could put one house on that parcel, which isn't going to make sense for anything. So we've got to find the appropriate zoning classification, and based upon your plan and based upon what you have going across the road, B2 is the most appropriate zoning classification.
You agree with that, Mike?
I know.
It's hard. It's hard. The comp plan is the basis for this decision, right?
But too many things have changed.
And that would be you could make that, you can certainly make that argument, but I would say that our comp plan, which is the guiding document for, and the document that our community approved in 09.
Yep.
Said it was okay. Do I think it was good planning to have B2 or general business abut single-family residential down there? No. I don't think that is ultimately the best thing to plan for, but that is our plan. And I think as a commission, you do need to be careful when you're deviating from what our future land use vision was in 2009.
But I remember as part of our discussion was a lot about the higher density and the congestion and the traffic and all of that too. So that was a big part of the concern about having, how much do you put in that area when you have this other area development too. And so I think that.
What did we base our traffic? We based our capital cost study on the original request, right?
Yeah, the traffic is based on the
150 units. Was that the original proposal?
Yeah, and again, if we go back to that traffic study, this traffic study did not require any major improvements based upon what we were planning on before, which was high-density apartments.
Right.
So we know that based on that traffic study that the corridors, the adjacent corridors, can handle higher density. Now, you know, back to the point, a lot of things have changed in Hudson in the last 10 years. Agree completely. The one thing that hasn't changed is your comp plan. Your comp plan will change, and you will go through the process. But for those that are looking to develop their property, the only thing that they have to look to is your current zoning map and your future land use plan and your comprehensive plan. And we can't anticipate what you might do in 2019. We'd like to, and frankly, that might make things a little easier, but we can't. And so all we have to go on is what you have in your record currently.
All fair statements. All fair statements.
Yeah.
You know, I don't.
What other options would we have? I mean, if we didn't do general, what he's asking for, is there a step down from that?
No.
No?
On a commercial district?
Leave it.
Huh?
You leave it. But we don't want to do that.
No, you can't just leave it. That's not right either.
Jeff, you got something to say?
With these plans and everything else, he's asking for a business. He's asking for, and he kind of pointed out on section 2 with what you guys went with, which I didn't get to speak before you guys closed that one out. And you guys are all assuming that the open space he's going to deliver on, and it's going to be worth something. If you guys decide to put this into a business or without a development plan, without seeing something, again, he can really start tweaking and doing anything once you change it from our egg to business. Or he can go into, like he said, since we've got 87 units here, he can take this 5 acres and put 100 units in there, because you guys have already agreed to it on section 2, and it's going to be cloned or similar to it. So basically right now, without his plan of what kind of business, what's going through, yes, I believe that he should find a few businesses that are willing to do it and what it's going to be like. But if you guys just agree with it and say, we'll see what happens in the future, and say okay or yes to it, well, you're already committing to one thing or another. Let's find out exactly what they're going to do with it and then go from there. Is he going to do 4 buildings with 36 on each one? So then 4 times that, 144 units, you know, 148 units up there. So basically that's high density then. I cannot stress, and I was really disappointed with you guys on the second one, that you guys didn't get to see where he's going to put the open lots and how they're going to actually put it done. And you guys agreed to it. So basically, he says he's going to work with the city and, you know, make sure that it works. You wanted something bigger than, you know, a park bench. They really don't have to now. They have to make the open and everything else. But we have to see what's going to happen in the future.
I hope you're wrong.
I would like to see this egg wait until he gets a business proposal or gets something, and then let's talk about it and let's see more presented of it. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Jeff. And I understand the comments. Frankly, that's not the way the real world works, right? I mean, that's the problem. We need to know what the zoning is, what's approved, so then we can identify proposed uses, and we can go out and we can talk with developers. Right now, it's ag res. So if I go out and I talk with a prospective developer of that property, they're going to say, what can I do? And I'm going to say, I don't know. I have to go to the plan commission, and I have to go to the city council. You know, whereas I'm coming to you proactively to say, I'm looking to use this property in a manner that's consistent with what you identified when you went through this plan as being appropriate for this area. And that's what I'm asking you to change it to, is something that you've already identified as appropriate.
Because it still comes before the, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, finish up.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I was out of turn.
Like you just pointed out, if we can do 144 units with, on top of the 36 on top of each building. So that's where he's coming up with the 148.
Still have to come back here.
Or 144. So my point is, they got the high density with now commercial on top of it, traffic.
But we have to approve that plan.
Yeah.
So,
but we don't, by approving the B2, we don't eliminate the ability to do that.
Here's a loaded question.
I didn't
6.2 acres, can you
comment.
fit?
What I'm saying,
By approving B2.
B2, and with the restriction that, with the ability to go in and do the commercial on the main floor with the apartments up above.
Right.
That gives them the ability to put in the 144 units.
Yep, I understand that. That's what scares me.
Yeah. Well, why don't we just give them 144 apartments and not have to waste the other traffic of the commercial to go with it? It's the sideways of getting the apartments.
But we may not approve that plan.
Do we want 144 apartments? That's
what it's coming down to.
Well, in other words, that he's guaranteed that?
No. That would mean that we would have to be on 6 acres, and I don't know that this is possible. We would have to be able to, number one, site 4 buildings. And number two, we'd have to be able to park all the cars that go with those 4 buildings. And number three, we'd have to find somebody that's willing to build 4 buildings instead of building the 2 buildings that we proposed before. To Pat's point, we would have loved that the Plan Commission would have saw the earlier proposal to be more appropriate because we thought it was more efficient. That being said, everybody's speculating at this point that we're building 4 buildings at 36 units with commercial. I don't know that to be the case. Honestly, I don't know that to be the case, and I can tell you that as I stand here today. There's no plan that puts 4 buildings on that property. Is that potentially an option? It potentially is an option under your code, but there are a number of approvals that we'd have to get from the city in order to make that happen, and I'm certain we'd be back in front of you again. So I'm looking for an underlying zoning classification that we can go out and actually market so we can make some progress with this property. Because frankly, my clients can't buy the 42 acres from Ryan Carey's clients until we have a zoning classification for 5 acres. We can't do it because we don't know what the use is until the city actually identifies a final zoning classification.
So if they put in 3 buildings, they got 109 apartments.
How many units were in the original?
I believe we'd requested 150 or 180. 150.
180. I think 153.
Oh,
that does feel like it was. It was close to 150.
Yeah, you're being like Trump.
Thanks, Pat.
Make up a number.
No.
I thought it was close to 180.
But we're still getting up with a lot of apartments here. Plus some commercial.
So what do you recommend?
I don't know a solution.
I don't either. That's what's.
I don't know a solution to it other than postponing it, but we don't have a zoning classification in between, do we? Can we?
You have B1, but it's not. That's neighborhood commercial, local commercial. So that would take a comp plan amendment too.
We're looking for less density. I mean, that's what we're struggling with here, and we're not trying to deny you. You're right. Everything you say, we agree with you. It's just I don't know if we have the horse in place, or the sticker to put on that one.
Well, but again, what I would tell you is that you have approval authority as we move forward. I mean, the city, even if the city approves a zoning classification, we're still going to have to come back for a number of things for approval from you. So it's not as though you're giving us carte blanche to go out tomorrow and build buildings. We have to build buildings that are compliant with your code.
But we are giving you carte blanche to build within the parameters of that code designation.
Of your code, correct.
Absolutely. And I tried to say that earlier to people that once we approve, when we were talking downtown here and stuff, hey, if they meet it, how do you say no?
But I take your comments to heart that the code and your guiding documents are your guiding documents. And when those involved with the comp plan developed that comprehensive plan map, it wasn't by accident that there was a portion of this that was identified as commercial and the rest of it as single family.
It was thought the dog track would become a business park.
And it is.
Yes, I understand that.
However, you still have this component on the east side of County F that, for whatever reason, was identified as commercial.
Maybe they didn't know what to do with it. Who knows?
Right, and I can't tell you why that was, except those that took part in the drafting of that document didn't see fit to include it as part of the single family, but rather they included it as commercial. And
I was here when they did that.
So was I. It was anticipated commercial because of the dog track, and regular commercial as far as gas station, a restaurant,
sure,
whatever.
And it could well, but it could well be. That's my point. Nobody is wedded to this concept that it's going to be apartments. It could be under your code, but I can guarantee you that my clients who are trying to get the highest and best price out of their property aren't going to put something on that 5 acres that's inconsistent with the rest of the development. Obviously, they want a consistent, compatible development because they have a financial interest in making sure that this develops appropriately as well.
either way, any development that you're gonna do has to come back to us.
Well, so what does that mean? What are you saying?
I'm just saying that nothing's approved, nothing, we change it to a zone, doesn't mean we have to approve anything.
We have no zoning classification that is a step down.
We do, it's B1.
B1.
But then you're giving them more of a, I think more.
I don't know, are we?
Apartments on B1, isn't it?
No, that'd be less.
Restricted?
I don't know what, but again, that wouldn't be consistent with the comp plan. So what would be your basis? I'm not arguing, I'm just saying, it's a tough spot. I get it.
We're all thinking out loud.
Yeah.
Well, maybe
So-
Not all of us.
Well, you say he can't think.
I don't know what to say.
So, we're not getting anywhere on
Nope.
this. Obviously, you're hearing from the Plan Commission that our concerns that were expressed last time we visited high density are the same concerns we have right now with a change of rezoning. So, I don't know how this works. I don't know if it can be done, but if I were to think out loud, I would suggest that we somehow come up with what we think would be the maximum number of apartments, maximum density that we would think appropriate for that piece of land. Enter, I don't know if this is legal, enter into an agreement with the developer that would be the number, no more than that number, as a condition to a change of the rezoning.
Well, unfortunately, the Plan Commission doesn't have that authority. I mean, we, as the applicant, and I respect that position, but as the applicant, we have the right to apply for a use that's consistent with your comprehensive plan.
Absolutely, and we have the right to turn it down.
Absolutely.
And
But the Plan Commission and the council, in order to turn it down, will have to make findings of fact that it is inconsistent with your land use plan. And so I understand that we talk density, but the reality is that density doesn't play into this conversation as strongly as it has in this discussion, because the question is the proposed use consistent with your plan? And so the Plan Commission and the council will have to determine whether the request is truly inconsistent with the plan that you've identified and adopted for this particular parcel. And I'd love to come to some mutual agreement on how we do that, but frankly, B1's that's not acceptable. We've asked from a residential perspective for what we'd like to see, and the Plan Commission didn't want to move in that direction, so rather than take it to council, we came up with a different concept which provides us with greater flexibility. There's still some residential flexibility, but there are a number of other commercial uses that we could make as well.
So, tell me again, Mike, what's the comprehensive plan call for?
General commercial.
And that allows for how much housing?
36 units per building.
Okay, for that, that's where we get to the 140, okay. And I guess an option that the Plan Commission might have is to make a recommendation that we just defer to the 2019 version of the comprehensive plan.
I'm not sure what the 2019 version of the comprehensive plan is.
Exactly right.
Yeah, and the council certainly has to make a determination, though. It either has to make the commission has to make either a recommendation for or against, or a simple deferral to the city council.
Well, I don't know that we have to do that right now. I think that we could make a recommendation to the council that we're going to defer the decision with a recommendation of the council that, given everything that we've had happen here so far in that area and the pressure that we're putting on Carmichael, that, given that we are just months away from a revision of the comprehensive plan, that we defer that decision until then.
That may be an option, but then that will prevent my clients from closing with the sellers. It will.
It may, but what it might also do is compel the developer to sit down with us and do exactly what I suggested a minute ago that you said we couldn't do.
Well, sure. But with all due respect, we've sat down with the city, with staff on this very issue, and B2 was one of the options identified collaboratively between developer and staff to say there are other options consistent with your plan. So this isn't a situation where we've come up with a proposal in isolation and brought it to you. We have been talking with staff, and this is certainly one of the options available.
Yeah, I get that.
Just a couple of brief comments. Again, Ryan Carey, representing the seller, Lee family. To say the Lee family has been patient on this, I think, is an understatement. I recall having a conversation with the mayor about annexation of this project quite some time ago, and then before my time, this conversation came up, and it's always been thought of as the next piece to be annexed part of the city. And I thought it was a big step in the right direction for Nick's clients to be patient and get this under contract and wait patiently while the city was dealing with other projects in town. Our patience on this project, also in working with Nick's client, when the city decided to annex this, I don't think the city had intentions of doing so and then letting it sit as ag res. That just doesn't make any sense. To annex it and then basically say you can't do anything on that property except to continue to farm it or put one house up seems like quite short-sighted. Why bother to annexing it in the first place then if that's what's going to happen? The other thing I'd like to remind this planning commission is that as part of our negotiations in bringing this into the city, my client negotiated for the payment of the deferred assessments to the tune of $125,000. So there has been a lot of time and energy put into this deal to make sure that, number one, annexation occurred, and once it did, that the plans that Nick Vivian is bringing forth on behalf of his client are consistent with the comp plan, and they are. And I realize that there are some questions about density, but that's why we have traffic studies. And those traffic studies have shown that even with a higher density, these corridors can handle it. So I submit to the Planning Commission, I think that a recommendation is I think, in line with your comp plan and consistent, I think, with a transition from what we're seeing across the street, which obviously both Nick and I are involved with on that project as well, from what's going to be a mixed commercial use across the street. You would transition into potentially commercial/residential use into townhomes, into single-family homes. It seems like a very, very smooth transition, and I think I just ask that be considered in your deliberations here.
They were talking about, what the money costs, everything else. They're talking about the dog track. You guys also have to look at the YMCA. You have to look at the elementary school. Can the elementary school, handle all these people? Yes. The question is, though, they're looking at as the business side, and do we want, again, everybody was looking at Carmichael, how much traffic it's going to be. You guys kind of mentioned about the business. Well, let's also look at the elementary school with the traffic and what's going to happen when people are going to be going down those roads for the elementary. Yes, we do have residential, our business, and that's coming in there, and they're looking at it and trying to mirror it and have you look at it. Well, let's look at the turkeys, let's look at the deer, look at the YMCA, and let's look at the elementary on the other side. Do we want that high density totally involved around both of those two places? They, you know, obviously the YMCA is not in the city, but we are brother and sisters with them. So again, look at that. Yes, they did spend a lot of money for it, but it's something that they wanted to do. It really has no significant, you know, plans on the city, what they've spent already for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
I just want to add, though, we've got to get away from this assumption that it's going to be high density. I don't know. I don't know that it's going to be apartments. What I know is that we need to be able to get to the closing table to make everything happen that Ryan explained to you. And we'll come back with a plan on what it's going to be in the future, because you get to approve it and you get to tell us yes or no. But if we're left to some future plan that we don't know of now, everything that we've worked for in terms of annexation, in terms of payment of the deferred assessments, in terms of the improvement of Mayor Road, the new road that you get that's not in any plan, that all goes away. And I can't promise that my clients are coming back, and I realize that that's not your issue. But we've worked awfully hard to get to this point, to get some sort of a zoning classification so that we can get to the closing table, so that we can complete the loop and get this deal finished. And again, I can't stress enough, you have the final authority and the final say over what happens on that property. And we can't sit here and speculate today as to what it might be, because we don't know. We don't have a developer lined up. We don't have a buyer lined up. But what we know we need so that we can close here in the very near future, hopefully by the end of November, but maybe even sooner, is a zoning classification.
Mary Claire.
I mean, I myself was a part of that comprehensive planning when we do it. Very anxious to, revisit that again, just because Hudson has changed so much in the last 10 years, and I think all of us around the table that were there maybe would have thought differently had we known, I don't know, what 10 years later would bring, hard to say. I think the hard part is on this one is that this does fit within what the current comprehensive plan is. Yeah. Do we all want density, a ton of density? I think we all have voiced our concerns about that. But if it fits within the comprehensive plan, I'm not sure how much leeway we have to not approve this. But when they bring the plans forward, we certainly have an opportunity to voice concern or not support something that is brought forward. But they're not going to be able to put something together until they have this change from agriculture. And as much as we might, or me, think a great big park, but that's not doable, and that's not going to happen. And that's not going to work within the overall plan. And when the city did annex the land, we knew all of these challengers were going to follow that when the decision was made by the council to annex the land. So I make a motion. It is.
I'll second it.
Motion is second. Discussion.
This is on changing it to B.
To commercial.
B2.
Which follows the comprehensive plan recommendation.
What's in the comp plan?
That's
the rules of the game when they...
We follow the code, we follow the rules, so I get it, okay.
Yeah, it's the underlying rules of the game.
Yep.
Okay.
That they're operating under, and if we can turn down, yes.
But with a little bit of, we would employ the developer to be really creative in all options.
And you know what our concerns are, please.
All right, everybody good? Yep. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. I've got nothing for...
I have one thing. Mm-hmm. We need a place to dump leaves. We need a recycling. We need...
It was great. Remember having that?
Huh?
Agreed.
Yeah. We need it. When?
I would strongly suggest you go to your Public Works Committee meeting and voice your opinion as a citizen.
So dump leaves as in what, like
Well,
compost?
River Falls has a compost site where people can take their yard waste and they make it into compost, and their city residents can come get the compost for free. Slick deal. The opposition we've had to that here in this town has always been we don't have the land for it, and there's some money, there's no question. But you also have to encompass, what are people paying for all these bags? Where's all this stuff ending up? The convenience factor of it, just a whole bunch of issues where personally I would love to have a compost place, a place to dump leaves. I just think it
Or burn 'em.
would be a wonderful thing.
Can't do that anymore.
We used to burn them, I used to love that.
Yeah, you can't do that anymore.
Don't open that can.
Do not bring
Oh, yeah.
roundabout. Or I might bring a roundabout up.
Do it next year. I bagged mine today.
Oh, yeah, over there. I got to a bag, I have to about 40 bags I have to fill, and I don't,
All right, so duly noted.
We're gonna talk about meeting dates. We wanna do the whole year, instead of just talking about every time, to set the schedule for the whole year like we do with council.
This is hard, jumping days around.
It's
This is
hard,
very hard.
it's too hard.
Yeah, but haven't we been accommodating a lot of the different things that have been happening that needed to be taken care of, like, quickly?
Lately,
So,
absolutely.
May I suggest Thursdays again? That used to be the old date, which for me works really great, but I mean, I think the mayor, you had a problem with that date, and if that still exists, I mean, I can't change it, but
we'll talk with Michael for
You're
something.
gonna be retired next year.
We just wanna set it. We're gonna have obviously the 12th. We've gotta get that done, and then,
I mean, that was a special time too. wasn't
that's a
it?
special meeting, yep.
I mean, a special time.
Monday, November 12th, 4:30.
4:30.
Okay.
Don't
Figure out the schedule and put it out, and people shoot holes in it and figure out what we get.
If we all answer.
I'll get you the gopher basketball.
Everybody does a
so
pretty
you
good job.
Know what to avoid.
Everybody does a pretty good job, and we appreciate it in terms of bonding. Makes our lives easier.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Got a motion and second to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is approved.